coming, kitten?
I've told you a million times not to talk to me when I'm doing my lashes.
She was Hollywood's first platinum blonde bombshell, the woman who defined glamour in the 1930s with her satin gowns and tough-talking screen presence. Jean Harlow rose from nowhere to become one of the biggest stars in the world, then died at 26, leaving behind questions that have never been fully answered. This is the story of dreams, stardom, and darkness, the tragic end of Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was born Harleyan Carpenter in Kansas City, Missouri in 1911. Her mother, known as Mother Jan, was a frustrated actress who'd never made it in show business and was determined that her daughter would achieve the fame she'd been denied. From childhood, Harleyan was pushed toward performing, groomed for a career she hadn't chosen but would eventually embrace. The family was comfortable financially. Harleyan's grandfather was a successful dentist, and she grew up in a nice neighborhood, attended good schools, lived the life of a typical middle-class girl. She wasn't running away from poverty or hardship when she went to Hollywood. She was running towards something her mother wanted, something that would eventually consume them both. At 16, Harleyan eloped with a wealthy young man named Charles McGrew. They moved to Los Angeles, and Harleyan found herself a teenage bride with time on her hands and no particular direction. She started hanging around movie studios partly out of boredom and partly because her mother was pushing her to pursue acting. The marriage was already failing. McGrew wanted a traditional wife while Harleyan was restless and curious about the movie world opening up around her. She began getting small parts as an extra, usually playing party girls or background characters. She was pretty but not extraordinarily so by Hollywood standards. Plenty of young women in Los Angeles were beautiful and hoping to be discovered. What set Harleyan apart was her willingness to be different, to not follow the rules about how female stars were supposed to look and behave. In 1929, she was working as an extra on a film when a studio executive noticed her. Not for her face or her figure, but for her platinum blonde hair, which was unusual and striking. Most actresses were brunettes or natural blondes. Harleyan had experimented with peroxide, creating a shade of blonde that was almost white, unlike anything anyone had seen before. The executive thought she had star potential and signed her to a contract. She took the stage name Jean Harlow, using her mother's maiden name, and started getting better roles. Her first major break came in Howard Hughes's film Hell's Angels in 1930, where she replaced another actress who'd been difficult to work with. Jean wasn't the most talented actress, but she had something the camera loved. A combination of beauty and toughness, a knowing quality that suggested experience beyond her years. Hell's Angels made Jean Harlow famous overnight. The film was a massive hit, and audiences were fascinated by this platinum blonde who didn't act like other actresses. She delivered her lines with a wink, as if she was in on the joke. She moved differently, talked differently, projected a modern sensibility that felt new and exciting. Suddenly, women all over America were bleaching their hair platinum blonde, trying to look like Jean Harlow. The impact of Hell's Angels went beyond just making Jean famous. The film established her screen persona, the tough, wisecracking blonde who could hold her own with any man. In one famous scene, she appeared in a white evening gown that shocked audiences with how revealing it was for 1930. She asked a man if he was shocked by her, and the line became famous. Jean wasn't playing a victim or an innocent girl. She was playing a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't apologize for it. Howard Hughes had taken a gamble on Jean, and it paid off enormously. The film made millions, and Jean became a household name. Theaters reported that women were copying her hairstyles, her makeup, even the way she spoke. The Harlow look became a phenomenon: pencil-thin eyebrows, platinum hair, dark red lips, satin gowns. Beauty parlors across America advertised Harlow treatments to help women achieve her distinctive shade of blonde. MGM signed her to a contract in 1932, recognizing that she was becoming a major star. They paired her with Clark Gable in Red Dust, and the chemistry was electric. The two of them together on screen created something powerful. Jean matching Gable's rough masculinity with her own brand of tough femininity. They made 5 more films together, and audiences couldn't get enough of them. The success of Red Dust established Jean as more than a one-hit wonder. She could act, she could carry a film, she had the kind of star power that made audiences buy tickets. MGM started building entire productions around her, calculating what kind of stories and co-stars would showcase her particular talents. She became one of their most valuable properties, expected to make 3 or 4 films a year and promote them all tirelessly. Jean's screen persona was revolutionary for the time. She played women who were knowing, worldly, unashamed of their desires. She wore satin gowns that clung to her body, moving in ways that suggested she wasn't wearing much underneath. There were rumors that she didn't wear undergarments, that the satin clung to her because there was nothing between her skin and the fabric. True or not, the rumors added to her mystique. Her private life was considerably less glamorous than her screen image. Her mother lived with her, controlled her finances, and interfered constantly in her personal relationships. Mother Jean was living vicariously through her daughter, treating Jean's career as her own achievement, her own second chance at the fame she'd never had. The relationship was suffocating, but Jean seemed unable to break free from it. Jean's second marriage to MGM executive Paul Byrne in 1932 ended in tragedy just 2 months after the wedding. Byrne was found deceased in their home from a gunshot wound, and the circumstances were never fully explained. There were notes left behind, suggestions of personal problems, whispers about scandals. MGM worked hard to control the narrative, to protect Jean's image and their investment in her career. The true story of what happened that night has been debated ever since. The scandal could have destroyed Jean's career, but MGM protected her, and audiences seemed to forgive her or at least not blame her for whatever had happened. She kept working, kept making successful films, kept being Hollywood's platinum blonde goddess. But people who knew her said she was changed after Byrne's passing, more fragile, less confident than she'd been before. She married again in 1933 to cinematographer Harold Rawson, but that marriage lasted less than a year. Jean seemed unable to find stability in her personal life. The relationships she pursued were troubled from the start, characterized by conflicts and incompatibilities that should have been obvious but somehow weren't. Friends wondered if she was drawn to difficult situations, if the chaos was somehow familiar and comfortable. Throughout all this, Jean kept working constantly. MGM had her making 3 or 4 films a year, promoting them tirelessly, maintaining her image as Hollywood's ultimate glamour queen. She was earning enormous money but had little control over it. Her mother managed her finances and made most decisions about her career and personal life. Jean was a star but seemed to have less freedom than most contract players. By the mid-1930s, Jean was one of the biggest box office draws in Hollywood. Her films with Clark Gable were guaranteed hits. She'd proven she could do comedy as well as drama. Dinner at 8 in 1933 showed she had real acting ability beyond just looking beautiful. Libeled Lady in 1936 demonstrated her gift for screwball comedy. She was more than a sex symbol, she was a legitimate actress. But the constant work was taking a toll. Jean looked exhausted in photographs from 1936 and 1937. Her face was puffy, her eyes tired. She'd gained weight, which MGM made her lose rapidly through crash diets and other methods. She complained of feeling unwell, of being constantly fatigued. But the studio doctors told her she was fine, that she just needed to work harder and eat less. In early 1937, Jean was in a relationship with actor William Powell, who'd been her co-star in several films. Powell was considerably older, more established, more stable than her previous romantic interests. Friends thought this relationship might be good for her, might provide the stability she'd never had. They got engaged, and Jean talked about wanting to take a break from filmmaking to focus on her personal life for a change. Powell represented something different for Jean. He wasn't intimidated by her fame or her beauty. He had his own successful career and didn't need anything from her except companionship. He was sophisticated, cultured, patient with her moods and insecurities. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Jean was in a relationship with someone who genuinely cared about her well-being more than about what she could do for them. The engagement gave Jean hope for a different kind of future. She talked to friends about wanting to have children, to be a real wife, and not just a movie star. She was only 26 but felt much older, exhausted by the relentless demands of her career and the chaos of her personal life. Powell offered stability, a chance to build something real and lasting. But MGM had her scheduled to make another film with Gable, Saratoga, starting in the spring of 1937. Jean reported to the set complaining of not feeling well, but she showed up and did her work professionally. Cast and crew members later recalled that she looked ill, that she seemed to be suffering, but she kept working because that's what was expected. Studios didn't stop production because an actress wasn't feeling well. The symptoms Jean was experiencing should have alarmed everyone around her. She was retaining fluid, her face and body were swollen, she had little energy, she looked pale and unwell. These are classic signs of kidney failure, but in 1937, most people didn't recognize them. Even if they had, Mother Jean's influence meant that no one could convince Jean to see a doctor against her mother's wishes. By May 1937, Jean was visibly unwell on the Saratoga set. She was pale, bloated, complaining of pain. She collapsed several times but kept being sent back to work after brief rests. The studio had a schedule to keep, money invested, a release date set. Jean's health was less important than completing the film on time and on budget. Her mother and the Christian Science beliefs she followed made things worse. Mother Jean didn't believe in conventional medicine, trusted in prayer and positive thinking rather than doctors. When Jean tried to seek medical help, her mother discouraged it, insisting that faith would heal whatever was wrong. Jean, conditioned to obey her mother, went along with this, even as her condition deteriorated. On May 29, 1937, Jean collapsed at home and couldn't get up. William Powell finally insisted on calling a real doctor over Mother Jean's objections. The doctor who examined her was horrified by what he found. Jean was suffering from kidney failure, probably caused by a childhood illness that had damaged her kidneys permanently. She needed immediate hospitalization and treatment. John was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, but by then it was too late. Her kidneys had failed completely. The toxins that should have been filtered out of her body had built up to dangerous levels. She slipped into a coma, and doctors told her family there was nothing they could do. The damage was too extensive, and medical treatments available in 1937 weren't advanced enough to save her. Jean Harlow passed away on June 7, 1937, at 26 years old. The official cause was uremic poisoning resulting from kidney failure, but the underlying cause was probably chronic nephritis, an inflammation of the kidneys that she'd had since childhood. If she'd been treated earlier, if her mother had allowed doctors to examine her when she first started showing symptoms, she might have lived. But the combination of Mother Jean's beliefs, MGM's demands, and Jean's own passivity about her health had created a perfect storm. The public was shocked. John Harlow had been one of the most visible stars in Hollywood, beautiful and vital, and suddenly she was gone. The funeral was massive, with hundreds of thousands of people lining the streets to watch the procession. Nelson Eddy sang at the service. MGM shut down production for the day. Hollywood had lost one of its biggest stars, and America had lost an icon. The scale of public mourning was remarkable. Radio programs were interrupted to announce her passing. Newspapers ran front-page obituaries with full-page photo spreads. Movie theaters held moments of silence before screenings. The grief was genuine and widespread. People felt like they'd lost someone they knew personally, even though they'd only ever seen her on screen. Her co-stars were devastated. Clark Gable, who'd made so many successful films with Jean, was deeply affected. He'd seen her decline on the Saratoga set and had felt helpless to stop it. Spencer Tracy, who'd worked with her on Libeled Lady, publicly mourned her passing and spoke about what a talented actress she'd been. The entire Hollywood community seemed stunned that someone so young and vital could be gone so suddenly. Saratoga was released after Jean's passing, with a double standing in for her in scenes she hadn't completed. Audiences flocked to see it, wanting one last glimpse of Jean Harlow on screen. The film was a hit, though watching it is eerie. You can see Jean looking increasingly unwell as the film progresses, her face swollen, her movements labored. She was literally dying on screen and nobody stopped it. The box office success of Saratoga, despite, or perhaps because of, Jean's passing demonstrated her enduring appeal. People wanted to see her one last time, to have a final experience of her screen presence. The film earned over $2 million, an enormous sum for 1937, proving that Jean's drawing power extended even beyond her life. The aftermath of her passing brought out all sorts of speculation and blame. Many people pointed fingers at Mother Jean, arguing that her refusal to allow medical treatment had killed her daughter. Others blamed MGM for working Jean so hard, for ignoring obvious signs that she was seriously ill. Some blamed the Christian Science faith that had prevented proper medical care. William Powell blamed himself for not intervening sooner. The truth is probably that everyone shares some blame. Mother Jean's beliefs prevented early treatment. MGM's demands kept Jean working when she should have been resting. Jean herself ignored symptoms and didn't advocate for her own health. The medical knowledge of 1937 was limited compared to what would be available just a few years later. It was a confluence of failures that resulted in tragedy. Jean's estate became a battleground. Her will had been written hastily and wasn't clear about her intentions. Mother Jean tried to claim everything, arguing that she'd managed Jean's career and deserved the money. William Powell contested this, as did other parties. The legal battles went on for years, with lawyers taking huge fees and the estate dwindling. Jean had earned millions during her short career, but much of it disappeared in legal costs and mismanagement. The legacy Jean left was complicated. On one hand, she'd changed Hollywood. The platinum blonde bombshell became a template that other actresses would follow. Marilyn Monroe most famously, but many others. Jean had shown that female stars could be tough and sexy simultaneously, could project both glamour and earthiness. She'd expanded what was possible for women in film. On the other hand, her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of Hollywood. Here was a woman who'd achieved everything: fame, wealth, beauty, success, and it hadn't saved her. The system that made her a star had also destroyed her, working her to exhaustion, ignoring her health problems, prioritizing profit over her well-being. Her passing at 26 seemed to confirm every dark suspicion about Hollywood's treatment of its stars. The what-ifs haunted people who'd known her. What if she'd gotten medical treatment earlier? What if she'd married William Powell sooner and he'd been able to protect her from her mother's influence? What if she'd taken a break from filmmaking when she first started feeling unwell? What if MGM had shut down production on Saratoga when it became clear she was seriously ill? Any of these things might have saved her life. Jean's films remained popular for years after her passing. When television became widespread in the 1950s, a new generation discovered her, fascinated by this platinum blonde from the 1930s who seemed so modern and ahead of her time. Her movies with Clark Gable were regularly shown, and audiences who'd never seen her in theaters got to experience her charisma and screen presence. But the full story of her life and passing wasn't widely known until decades later, when biographies and studies of Hollywood history started examining what had really happened. The sanitized version that MGM had promoted, that Jean had died suddenly of an illness nobody could have predicted, gave way to a more complicated and disturbing truth about medical neglect, studio exploitation, and family dysfunction. Modern viewers watching Jean Harlow's films can see hints of what was happening behind the scenes. The exhaustion in her face in later films, the way she sometimes seems to be struggling to maintain her energy, the moments where her discomfort is visible despite her professional performance. She was suffering, and she kept working, and nobody stopped her until it was too late. The relationship between Jean and her mother has been extensively analyzed by psychologists and biographers. Mother Jeanne was a classic stage mother, living through her daughter, unable to let go or allow Jean to make her own decisions. She controlled Jean's money, her career choices, her romantic relationships, and finally her medical care. Jean seemed unable to break free, conditioned from childhood to obey, to be the star her mother had always wanted to be. The Christian Science issue is particularly troubling in retrospect. The faith's teachings about healing through prayer rather than medical intervention may work for some conditions, but for acute kidney failure, prayer wasn't going to be enough. Mother Jean's insistence on following these beliefs rather than seeking medical help for her daughter directly contributed to Jean's passing. It's hard not to see this as a betrayal, a mother prioritizing her beliefs over her daughter's life. MGM's role in the tragedy is equally disturbing. The studio knew Jean was unwell but kept her working. They had enormous power over contract players, and they used that power to maximize their investment in Jean regardless of the personal cost to her. This wasn't unusual for Hollywood in the 1930s. Stars were property, and studios worked them as hard as they could. But knowing that doesn't make it less appalling. The fact that Jean was making Saratoga with Clark Gable when she was dying adds another layer of tragedy. Gable and Jean had real affection for each other, genuine friendship, if not romance. Watching her decline on set must have been difficult for him. He reportedly tried to get production shut down to get Jean medical help, but he didn't have the power to make it happen. After Jean's passing, Gable was never quite the same. The easygoing charm that had defined his screen persona became tinged with sadness. Jean's story also illustrates the limited medical knowledge of the 1930s. Today, kidney failure is treatable. Dialysis exists. Kidney transplants are possible. Medications can manage chronic kidney disease. In 1937, none of these options existed. Once Jean's kidneys failed completely, there was nothing doctors could do. She was dying of a condition that would be manageable today, which makes her passing feel even more tragic and unnecessary. The medical advances that came just a few years after Jean's passing make her story even more heartbreaking. By the 1940s, understanding of kidney disease had improved significantly. By the 1950s, dialysis was becoming available. If Jean had been born 20 years later, or if her medical crisis had occurred a decade after it did, she almost certainly could have been saved. The timing of her illness couldn't have been worse. The platinum blonde hair that made Jean famous also represented a kind of trap. She'd created this image that audiences loved and that studios marketed relentlessly. But maintaining that platinum color required constant chemical treatments that damaged her hair and scalp. She had to maintain an impossible standard of beauty while working exhausting hours and dealing with personal tragedies. The image was a prison she couldn't escape from. The process of achieving and maintaining that platinum shade was brutal. Multiple bleaching treatments, harsh chemicals, constant touch-ups to handle new growth. Jean's hair was reportedly brittle and damaged from the treatments. She wore wigs sometimes when her own hair was too damaged to work with. The beauty that made her famous came at a significant physical cost. One more way that the demands of stardom damaged her health. Looking at photographs of Jean Harlow today, knowing how young she was and how soon she'd be gone, is deeply sad. In her early films, she's vibrant and alive, full of energy and confidence. By 1937, she looks worn down, older than her 26 years, exhausted in ways that makeup couldn't fully hide. The transformation happened in just 7 years, from 1930 to 1937, from her breakthrough to her passing. Her final resting place became a site of pilgrimage for fans. People who'd loved her films, who'd idolized her, who tried to look like her, came to pay respects. The grave remained popular through the decades, with new generations discovering her through television and home video and coming to visit. She became a symbol of Hollywood's golden age and its darkness, the glamour and the tragedy intertwined. Jean Harlow's story resonates because it's fundamentally about someone who never really got to be herself. From childhood, she was shaped by her mother's ambitions. As a star, she was shaped by studio demands and public expectations. She played roles on screen and off. never quite finding space to just be Harley and Carpenter, the girl from Kansas City. By the time she might have been old enough and strong enough to claim her own identity, it was too late. If you enjoyed this look at one of Hollywood's first true stars and want to hear more stories about the golden age of cinema, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating content.